Did you ever wonder what skeletons lurk in Elvis Presley's musical closet? Are there songs the king himself might wish had never been recorded? Even legends have their off days, and Elvis Presley, despite his unparalleled status in music history, wasn't immune to the occasional musical misstep. While his catalog boasts countless classics that define generations, there exists a shadowy corner of the Elvis discography that even the most devoted fans might quietly skip when they come up on shuffle. These aren't just lesser-known tracks. They're songs that make you question whether the same voice that delivered Suspicious Minds could also be responsible for these peculiar musical detours. (1962). Have you ever imagined Elvis singing from the perspective of a crustacean? That actually happened. Released on the Girls, Girls, Girls soundtrack, Song of the Shrimp might be the most bizarre entry in Elvis's entire catalog. The track tells the life story of a small shrimp who meets a tragic end, narrated by Elvis with unexpected sincerity considering the absurd subject matter. Presley croons about the shrimp's mother warning her baby about the dangers of the ocean, only for the little creature to end up on someone's plate. The song features lines like, "Though he was just a shrimp, he had a heart that was big. Sometimes a tear would fall when he'd dance a little jig." The song emerged during Elvis's movie years, when Colonel Tom Parker had him churning out formulaic films with equally formulaic soundtracks. This period in the early 1960s saw Elvis's musical direction heavily controlled by business interests rather than artistic ones. Song of the Shrimp exemplifies the creative nadir many Elvis scholars point to when discussing the damage done to his musical legacy during these years. Recording sessions for the Girls, Girls, Girls soundtrack took place in May 1962 at Radio Resorters in Hollywood. Historical accounts suggest Elvis himself was less than enthusiastic about many of the songs he was required to record during this period, though he maintained his professionalism in the studio. Musicians present at these sessions have reported that Elvis would often shake his head or roll his eyes at some of the material, but he nevertheless committed to delivering performances that satisfied contractual obligations. The bizarre seafood ballad has since gained a certain cult following specifically because of its oddity, becoming something of an inside joke among Elvis aficionados. Some fan club members even hold Song of the Shrimp listening parties, where the only admission requirement is bringing a shrimp-based dish to share. Number 2, Queenie Wahine's Papaya, 1966. Did Elvis really record a song about a Hawaiian girl selling fruit? Yes, and it's exactly as cheesy as it sounds. This tropical oddity appeared in the 1966 film Paradise, Hawaiian Style, one of many formulaic movies Elvis starred in during the 1960s. The song centers on a girl named Queenie Wahine, who sells papayas at a roadside stand in Hawaii. With lyrics like, "She's got a papaya, it's big and it's ripe and round," delivered with Elvis's signature vocal style, the double entendres are about as subtle as a sledgehammer. The recording took place at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on July 26, 1965, during sessions for the Paradise Hawaiian Style soundtrack. By this point, Elvis was fully entrenched in the movie star phase of his career, churning out 3 films a year with accompanying soundtrack albums. The quality of both the films and their music had been steadily declining since the early 1960s, with songs chosen more for their ability to fit into predetermined movie scenes than for their musical merit. Queenie Wahine's Papaya represents a particularly low point in terms of material Elvis was given to record. The song combines forced Hawaiian themes with juvenile humor, wrapped in a forgettable melody that gives Elvis virtually nothing to work with vocally. Studio musicians who backed Elvis during this period have remarked that sessions for the movie soundtracks often felt like assembly line work rather than creative endeavors. Film historians note that Paradise, Hawaiian Style, was the third and final Hawaiian movie Elvis made, following Blue Hawaii and Girls, Girls, Girls. The pattern of recycling settings and themes had become painfully apparent by this point. The repetitive nature of these projects contributed to Elvis's growing frustration with his film career, though he wouldn't break free from the movie contract cycle until his famous 1968 television special sparked his creative renaissance. The song has become emblematic of what Elvis biographers often call his lost decade, the period when his immense talent was squandered on subpar material that did little to advance his artistic legacy. Number 3. Old MacDonald, 1967. Would you believe Elvis recorded a rock version of the children's farm animal song? That really happened in 1967, appearing on the Double Trouble soundtrack. Elvis's take on Old MacDonald might be one of the most incongruous marriages of performer and material in music history. The king of rock and roll somehow found himself belting out I-I-E-I-O with a straight face, backed by electric guitars and drums, trying desperately to rock up a nursery rhyme. This unlikely recording occurred during sessions at Radio Retzorders in Hollywood on June 28, 1966. By this point, Elvis was in the final years of his movie contract obligations, going through the motions with increasingly threadbare film projects. Double Trouble represented the 23rd movie in Elvis's filmography, and the quality of both the films and their accompanying soundtracks had long since become secondary to merely fulfilling contractual requirements. The context of this recording reveals much about Elvis's career situation at the time. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, had locked the singer into a cycle of making 3 movies per year, each requiring soundtrack recordings, regardless of quality. Studio musicians present during these sessions later recounted how visibly disengaged Elvis often appeared when faced with material so clearly beneath his abilities. Music historians have pointed to songs like Old MacDonald as prime examples of how Elvis's tremendous vocal talent was wasted during this period. The arrangement attempts to disguise the children's song with contemporary rock elements, but there's simply no escaping the fundamental mismatch between Elvis's powerful, sensual vocal instrument and lyrics about farm animals. Elvis confidant and Memphis Mafia member Lamar Fike later revealed in interviews that Elvis would sometimes express frustration in private about the quality of songs he was recording for movies, but he generally maintained his professional demeanor in the studio. He knew some of the stuff was junk, Fike once said, but he also knew complaining wouldn't change anything as long as the movie contracts were in place. Perhaps most telling is that during his 1968 comeback special and subsequent return to live performing, Elvis never once chose to include Old MacDonald in his set lists, tacitly acknowledging that some recordings were best left in the vault. Number 4. Do the Clam, 1965. Can you imagine Elvis instructing fans to perform a dance called the Clam? This actually happened in 1965. Featured in the film Girl, Happy, Do the Clam, stands as a testament to how far Elvis's music had strayed from his rebellious rock and roll roots by the mid-1960s. The song instructs listeners on how to perform a fictional dance move called the Clam, with Elvis singing lines like, "Do the clam, dig right in and do the clam," with surprising enthusiasm, considering the ridiculous subject matter. The recording took place at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on June 10, 1964. This session was specifically for the Girl Happy soundtrack, a film that featured Elvis as the leader of a band sent to secretly chaperone a college student during spring break in Fort Lauderdale. The film represented the 16th movie in Elvis's career and continued the formula of lightweight comedies with beach settings that had become standard for his film output. To the Clam exemplifies the beach party film genre that was popular in the mid-1960s, with movies often featuring contrived dance crazes created specifically to fuel soundtrack sales. By the time Elvis recorded this track, authentic dance crazes like the twist had already peaked in popularity, making manufactured dances like the Clam seem even more forced and commercial. Music critics and Elvis biographers have frequently cited songs like "To the Clam" when discussing how Elvis's recording career was compromised during his movie years. The gap between what Elvis was capable of as a vocalist and the material he was recording had grown into a chasm by this point. This disconnect would eventually contribute to his declining record sales during this period, as the Beatles and other British invasion bands dominated the charts with more relevant, exciting music. Interestingly, despite the superficial nature of the song, Elvis's vocal performance remains committed and professional. Session musicians from this period have commented that no matter how trivial the material, Elvis would still attempt to deliver it with conviction, a testament to his work ethic, even when the material didn't deserve his talent. After Elvis's death, an interview surfaced where he briefly mentioned the film's soundtrack recording, saying, "Some of those soundtrack songs, man, let's just say there's a reason they didn't make the live show." This rare moment of critique from Elvis himself suggests he was well aware of the quality disparity in his catalog. Number 5 Yoga is As Yoga Does, 1967. Did Elvis really record a song mocking yoga decades before it became mainstream in America? The answer might surprise you. Featured in the film Easy Come, Easy Go, this track stands as one of the most culturally tone-deaf moments in Elvis's recorded output. The song includes lyrics that poke fun at yoga practices with lines like, "You twist yourself in knots to find your inner truth, while I sit drinking beer and wasting my youth." Elvis performs it as a duet with Elsa Lanchester, famous for her role as the Bride of Frankenstein, who plays a yoga instructor in the film. This curious recording took place at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on September 28, 1966. Easy Come, Easy Go was Elvis's 25th film and one that saw him playing a Navy frogman turned treasure hunter. By this point, Elvis was firmly entrenched in the final phase of his movie career, with both the films and their soundtracks reaching new lows in terms of quality and commercial appeal. Yoga is As Yoga Does particularly stands out for its cultural insensitivity. The song treats yoga, an ancient spiritual practice with deep religious significance in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, as nothing more than a silly fad worthy of ridicule. The portrayal reflects the limited understanding of Eastern spiritual practices in mainstream American culture of the 1960s, but that doesn't make it any less cringeworthy for modern listeners. Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, who had written some of Elvis's greatest early hits like Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock, had long since stopped working with him by this point. The decline in songwriting quality was evident in tracks like this one, written by Bernie, Bomb Bill, Giant, and Florence Kay, a team responsible for many of Elvis's most forgettable movie songs. Recording engineers present during these sessions have recalled that the atmosphere in the studio had become increasingly businesslike and mechanical by this period. Elvis would come in, record the required soundtrack songs with minimal discussion or creative input, and leave. The passion and experimentation that had characterized his earlier recording career had been replaced by a factory-like efficiency designed to meet movie contract deadlines. Elvis biographer Peter Grolnick has written about how songs like "Yoga is as Yoga does" represented not just a waste of Elvis's vocal talents, but actually damaged his credibility as a serious artist. While the Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and exploring Indian musical influences with respect and genuine interest, Elvis was relegated to mocking Eastern practices in poorly written novelty songs. Number 6. No Room to Rumba in a Sports Car. 1963. Have you ever wondered about the logistical challenges of dancing in a compact automobile? Elvis sang about exactly that. This peculiar track appeared in the 1963 film Fun in Acapulco, starring Elvis as a former trapeze artist working as a lifeguard and nightclub singer in Mexico. The song details the spatial limitations that prevent proper rumba dancing within the confines of a sports car, with Elvis lamenting, "There's no room to rumba in a sports car, just enough room for my baby and me." Recording sessions for the Fun in Acapulco soundtrack took place at Radio Resorters in Hollywood in January 1963. This period represented the height of Elvis's film production schedule, when his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had negotiated deals that prioritized quantity over quality. Elvis was making 3 films per year, each requiring soundtrack recordings regardless of their musical merit. No Room to Rumba in a Sports Car exemplifies the increasingly trivial subject matter Elvis was asked to sing about during his movie years. Written by Fred Wise and Dick Manning, the song serves a specific scene in the film, but offers little in terms of lasting musical value. The Latin-flavored arrangement attempts to match the Mexican setting of the movie, but the forced rhyme scheme and silly premise undermine any authentic feeling the music might otherwise convey. Music historians have noted that by this point Elvis's records were being marketed primarily as souvenirs of his films rather than as serious musical releases. The soundtrack albums were essentially promotional material for the movies, with song selection based on filling specific scene requirements rather than promoting Elvis's considerable vocal talents. Elvis's close friend and Memphis Mafia member Marty Lacker later commented in interviews that during this period, Elvis would often express frustration about the quality of material he was recording. According to Lacker, Elvis knew most of the movie songs were garbage, but he was trapped in those contracts. The Colonel had him doing 3 pictures a year and each one needed about 10 songs, whether they were good or not. The recording itself demonstrates how, even with subpar material, Elvis's professionalism never wavered. His vocal performance remains committed and energetic despite the ridiculous premise. Session musicians who worked with Elvis during these years have consistently remarked on his ability to deliver earnest performances regardless of how trivial the material might be. Perhaps most telling is that when Elvis returned to live performing after his 1968 comeback special, he never chose to include No Room to Rumba in a Sports Car or most other movie songs in his concert repertoire, instead focusing on his early rock and roll classics and contemporary material that better forecasted his artistic. Number 7. Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce, 1965. Would you believe Elvis recorded what amounts to a tourism advertisement, disguised as a song? That's exactly what happened in 1965. This peculiar track appeared in the film Girl Happy, where Elvis played the leader of a band hired to secretly chaperone a college student during spring break in Florida. The song is essentially a 3-minute commercial for Fort Lauderdale, listing the city's attractions and encouraging listeners to visit where the boys are, and the girls are, and the sun and sand all day. Recording took place at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on June 11, 1964, during sessions dedicated to the Girl Happy soundtrack. By this point, Elvis was deep into his film career, churning out movies according to formulas that had been established by his management and the studios. Each film required approximately 10 songs, creating a constant demand for material that often led to questionable quality control. Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce stands out for its nakedly commercial nature. Rather than expressing any authentic emotion or telling a compelling story, the song functions purely as promotional material for a tourist destination. The lyrics read like they were lifted directly from a travel brochure, with lines like, "You can get a tan while you're holding hands beneath the tropical moon that shines," and references to swimmin' and fishin' too, and romance in the evening to follow through. And music critics have pointed to songs like this as evidence of how far Elvis's recording career had strayed from his groundbreaking early work. During the same period that Bob Dylan was releasing Highway 61 Revisited, and the Beatles were experimenting with increasingly sophisticated compositions, Elvis was recording what amounted to jingles embedded in light movies. The song's writers, Roy C. Bennett and Sid Tepper, were frequent contributors to Elvis's movie soundtracks, having written over 40 songs recorded by Elvis throughout his career. While some of their compositions were respectable pop numbers, by the mid-1960s they were increasingly tasked with writing songs that served specific scenes or concepts from the films, rather than creating material that would stand on its own musical merits. Elvis's longtime band members later recalled that during soundtrack recording sessions from this era, there was little discussion about musical direction or artistic choices. The process had become largely mechanical. Elvis would arrive at the studio, record the required songs with minimal preparation, and move on to the next project. Creative decisions were secondary to fulfilling contractual obligations and meeting production schedules. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of songs like Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce is how completely they disappeared from Elvis's repertoire once he regained control of his musical direction. After the 1968 comeback special revitalized his career, Elvis never performed this song or most other movie soundtrack numbers in concert, tacitly acknowledging their status as work-for-hire projects, rather than meaningful entries in his musical legacy. Number 8, Kissin' Cousins, 1964. Did Elvis really sing a love song about romantic relationships between relatives? This questionable choice became the title track of a 1964 film. Kissin' Cousins served as the theme for the movie of the same name, in which Elvis played dual roles as an Air Force officer and his hillbilly look-alike cousin. The song celebrates the practice of dating within one's extended family with lyrics like, "Kissin' cousins. That's what we are, kissin' cousins, and we're kissin' all the time." This eyebrow-raising track was recorded at RCO Studio B in Nashville on September 29, 1963. By this point, Elvis was fully entrenched in his movie career, with his musical output largely dictated by film requirements rather than artistic considerations. Kissin' Cousins marked his 14th film and represented a new low in terms of both production values and conceptual originality. The song itself, written by Fred Wise and Randy Starr, embodies the declining quality of material Elvis was recording during this period. Beyond the questionable subject matter, the composition lacks the energy and conviction of Elvis's better work. The arrangement attempts a rockabilly feel that recalls his earlier recordings, but the forced references to rural stereotypes create an awkward pastiche rather than an authentic musical statement. Music historians have noted that Kissin' Cousins represents a particularly transparent attempt to capitalize on stereotypes about Southern culture. Ironic, given Elvis's own Southern roots and the authentic regional influences present in his groundbreaking early work. The song trades in simplistic caricatures rather than the genuine cultural fusion that made Elvis's initial recording so revolutionary. The recording session itself was reportedly completed quickly and with minimal creative discussion. By this stage in his career, Elvis had largely resigned himself to the assembly line nature of his movie soundtrack work. Session musicians who played on these recordings have recalled that Elvis would often arrive at the studio, record the required tracks with professional efficiency, and depart without the creative engagement that had characterized his earlier sessions. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, reportedly viewed the movies and their soundtracks primarily as merchandising opportunities rather than artistic endeavors. This perspective helped create an environment where songs like Kissin' Cousins could be approved as title tracks, despite their questionable quality and subject matter. The commercial performance of the song reflected the declining public interest in Elvis's movie soundtracks. While Kissin' Cousins reached pound 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, this represented a significant drop from his earlier chart dominance. By comparison, the Beatles would release Can't Buy Me Love just a few months later, which shot to pound 1 and highlighted the growing gap between Elvis's movie material and the evolving popular music landscape. Number 9, Petunia, the Gardener's Daughter, 1965. Is it possible that Elvis, the revolutionary cultural icon who changed music forever, recorded a song about a gardener's daughter named after a flower? The answer is yes, he absolutely did. This obscure track appeared on the soundtrack for Frankie and Johnny, a 1966 musical film set in the 1890s where Elvis played a riverboat gambler. The song represents perhaps the perfect storm of Elvis's movie career lowlights, period-specific constraints, childish humor, and material wholly unsuited to his natural vocal style and persona. Recording sessions for Frankie and Johnny took place at Radio Resorters in Hollywood in May 1965. This soundtrack emerged during what many Elvis scholars consider the nadir of his recording career, when his artistic identity had been almost completely subsumed by the demands of film production schedules and marketability concerns. Petunia, the Gardener's Daughter, features Elvis affecting a theatrical vaudevillian delivery style to match the film's period setting. The lyrics rely on painfully obvious plant-based double entendres, with lines like, "Petunia, the gardener's daughter, was just 16 years old when she discovered something growing in her garden." The song attempts to be playfully risque while remaining technically appropriate for the film's family audience, resulting in an awkward compromise that satisfies neither artistic nor entertainment purposes. Written by Bill, Giant, Bernie, Baum, and Florence Kay, who collectively wrote many of Elvis's least memorable movie songs. The track exemplifies how far removed Elvis's recording career had become from both his groundbreaking early work and the evolving Ponte music landscape of the mid-1960s. While contemporaries like the Rolling Stones were releasing Satisfaction and the Beach Boys were creating Pet Sounds, Elvis was recording novelty songs about gardening with thinly veiled sexual references. The musical arrangement attempts to recreate a turn of the century ragtime style, with banjo and piano prominent in the mix. This period-appropriate instrumentation further distances the recording from Elvis's natural rock and roll roots, forcing his distinctive voice into stylistic territory that changes none of his natural strengths as a vocalist. Film historians have noted that Frankie and Johnny represented a particularly transparent attempt by Colonel Tom Parker and film producers to capitalize on the period musical trend that had found success with movies like The Music Man and My Fair Lady. However, unlike those productions which featured original songs crafted specifically for their historical settings, Frankie and Johnny relied on hastily written numbers that prioritized scene functionality over musical quality. Elvis biographer Peter Gerlich has written about how songs like Petunia, the Gardener's Daughter, represented not just a waste of Elvis's considerable talents, but an active undermining of the musical legacy he had established in the 1950s. The very qualities that had made Elvis revolutionary, his authentic fusion of country, gospel, and rhythm and blues influences, his natural sensuality and his cultural boundary crossing, were entirely absent from formulaic productions like this. Perhaps most telling is that after Elvis reclaimed control of his musical direction following the 1968 comeback special, he never performed Petunia, the Gardener's Daughter, or referenced it in any way. Like many of his movie soundtrack recordings, it was effectively disowned through its absence from his concert repertoire, relegated to a curious footnote in a legendary career. Haven't you ever wondered what Elvis himself thought about these songs? Would even he skip them if they came up on shuffle?